How are we doing?
What's going on, man?
Me again.
You again.
I know.
I like it.
Ugh, I can't get rid of me. I think I probably answered all your questions, haven't I?
Yeah. Well, instead of looking forward this time, I wanted to look back and talk about this past weekend with,
Sure.
with the Buckley call, right? I mean, obviously, everybody's debating, is this the greatest highlight, the greatest knockout we've ever seen? I know you liked it going in there. You've had a couple days to reflect on it. Is that the best knockout we've ever seen?
It's certainly up there. The thing I struggle with is picking knockouts apart between the ones that were planned before they got in the octagon and the ones that were circumstantial when they were in there. I broke it down on the aftermath on the YouTube channel. Twice in the first round, the kick was caught and Buckley acknowledged it but wasn't able to return with it. The second round when it came out and Kasang and I got a better grip on the ankle, that was when he made the adjustment, and it was just a beautiful knockout. Obviously, the one that people keep firing out there is Masvidal against Askren, and that, for me, the best thing about that is that he knew exactly what he was doing when he got in there. Same with McGregor and Aldo. That was a planned setup to finish, and when they are able to do it so quickly, that's very, very special. That requires someone to research, to understand what their opponent's going to do, to work on a predictability, and then to make it happen in the fight, which is the most difficult thing to do, especially at that high level. Main event as well for both of those. So it's difficult to overcome those two for me. Certainly for 2020, that is the knockout of the year. And you know, it wasn't. I mean, I saw a couple of people going, "Oh, well, you know, maybe a lucky shot or whatever." It's ridiculous. You know, you don't throw that kick without meaning to land it. And it's also something that's very difficult to train because you can't fire it full power. You don't want to throw it in training because the likelihood is someone's going to get hurt. And it's just a beautiful technique, isn't it? You know, I think we've got 4 back kick knockouts to the head in total in the UFC, and to have one when he was mid-air after his foot getting caught, spectacular.
I was going to ask you, like, as much as you love studying the game, I mean, you just said right away that's traditional Taekwondo, right? It's like old school, thousands of years technique or whatever, but we've never seen it in a displayed in a fashion like that, right? So
yeah.
What does that do for just like kind of the martial arts nerd inside of you to see like new techniques that are really just, you know, old techniques but being, you know, revitalized, I guess?
It's amazing. And what's unfortunate is we had another beautiful finish in the main event from another traditional Taekwondo technique that is being slightly overlooked given the fact that Buckley's knockout was so emphatic. Yeah, I mean, the Raptors will tell you my library at home is ridiculous. I've got about 2,000 books, and I've got everything from Taekwondo to Hapkido to just bought a Wing Chun dummy. There's definitely a lot of stuff from the traditional martial arts that's applicable, and we're going through this constant filtration process with MMA. You know, we started off, people were coming in with individual styles, and we'll see what works here and there. Then we get the ground and pound guys coming in that have understood how to reverse engineer jiu-jitsu, using their wrestling to stay on top and nullify the ground game and beat people up. Then we saw the sprawl and brawl guys. You know, it's like there's this constant evolution going on. And the stage that we're at now is MMA has largely become a foundational art in itself. You know, it's made up of, you know, wrestling, Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu and Muay Thai is really the foundation. But then every now and then we'll get a purist that will come in and they'll throw a sprinkling of something else in. You know, Ronda coming in as a judoka, Kara Parisian back in the day as a judoka. There's a lot of benefit in the traditional martial arts. The difficulty is sorting through it and seeing what's applicable and what's not. And you know, as a 17-year Taekwondo practitioner, there's so much about Taekwondo that is applicable, and it's somewhat been harmed by it becoming an Olympic sport because it's become a bit of a game of tag. Like back in the day, I was fighting full contact, and the point was to upset your opponent's balance with the shot. Like you had to land with power. And I remember the back kick being one of my favourite techniques. And to apply it in MMA is very difficult because the danger of missing it, you give you back. You know, you find yourself in all kinds of bad positions. So there are high risk movements that still do pay dividends. And we've got so many fighters coming from all around the world with different styles. I mean, we've got Wushu Sanda fighters coming into the UFC now as well. We're going to continue to watch the game evolve, and I think now we've got a foundation of martial arts. The new kids coming through are starting with MMA, then they'll start going back into the history books and finding those specialisms that, as Bruce Lee said, you know, you absorb what's useful, you reject what's useless, and you add what is, what's the word? I can't remember exactly, but it's basically you add what is your own. You know, you add your own personal sprinkling onto it. And now we've got that foundation of MMA. We're getting confidence from these guys to try all different kinds of things. I love it, man. I love it. And I always try and daydream where the sport's going to be in 5 or 10 years. We're going to see a lot more traditional martial arts coming through.
Dig it. Let's talk about this weekend's main event. Obviously, everybody's excited about it. For you, what's the key to this fight? Like, where is the most important, area of engagement that we need to watch out for?
Well, ultimately, it's down to Brian Ortega to decide where he wants the fight to take place. What we know of Korean Zombie from back in the day, you go back to the Leonard Garcia fight in WEC, and that was an absolute war. But when he made his UFC debut, won by Twister. So we got two sides of the same coin of Korean Zombie. He can trade punches and get wild, but he can also submit you with a highly technical submission. The streak that he went on after that, knocking out Mark Hominick in 6 seconds, getting in there against Aldo and giving a good account of himself, I think it set him up for a good time away to reflect on where he's at and who he was as a fighter while the division was developing around him. When he returned to the UFC, he was a different individual. And what I like about the Korean Zombie, much like Justin Gaethje and the evolution that we've seen in him recently, he doesn't need to take punches. He's not there to be hit anymore. You watch the Moicano fight, and he stands waiting. And it's one of the most beautiful knockouts I've ever seen, purely because he never takes his eyes off Moicano's chin. He waits for the shot to come. As the punch comes out, he slips, and he watches his chin as he comes over and hits him with that laser-focused right hand. The mentality of not caring about your own well-being and the damage you take to your face puts you in a very strong position to slip your head off the center line and punish people for missing. We've seen that with Justin Gaethje recently. Korean Zombie turned that corner when he came out of the military and rejoined the UFC. So it's all about him standing his ground and waiting for Ortega to come to him. And what I like about Ortega as well, coming off his first loss, he will have definitely learned from that. We know he's got good boxing skills. We know he's got great ground skills as well. Zombie's a bit of an enigma on the ground. We don't know much about him on the ground, so I wouldn't mind seeing it hit the mat for a scramble. But in the striking ranges, it's Ortega drifting in and out of range and peppering him with boxing, while Zombie waits to knock him out with that one clean punch. They're very, very different strikers, very, very different approach to the game, but both highly skilled and highly technical. And I always get excited to see an undefeated fighter pick up a first loss and see what they change about their game, because we always see jumps in their game, evolutions, and Brian Ortega is the kind of guy that doesn't need to pick up second loss like Justin Gaethje did. A little bit hard-headed of him to go back into the next fight with the same style. I'm excited to see the developments in his game, and Korean Zombie's a legend. He was a legend before he even signed his UFC contract because of that Leonard Garcia fight. So it'll be an honor to call that one.
Brian Ortega obviously has the traditional Gracie Jiu-Jitsu style, but Korean Zombie, like you said, just pull off twisters and all kinds of. Do you view this as sort of a 10th Planet versus Gracie Jiu-Jitsu style matchup?
It's definitely orthodox against unorthodox. Absolutely. What I like about Brian Ortega's style is obviously we know him as T-City, and he has got excellent submissions off his back. But it's his grip adjustments when he's on a guillotine, and the majority of the time he finds himself on a guillotine because people don't want to deal with his striking anymore. I always say that the guillotine is the striker's submission. I've only got one submission on my record, and that was because the guy didn't want to kickbox with me anymore. People run into guillotines when they. Exactly. Good example. But see, Brian Ortega's got a well-rounded ground game that he doesn't feel the need to use in every one of his fights. It's there in his back pocket if he needs it. But we also know that he can get fights stopped with strikes. What with Frankie Edgar, obviously the Clay Guida one stands out in my mind. Brian Ortega, he's a third-round fighter. He gets better as the fight goes on, but over 3 rounds, it puts a lot of pressure on him to get the finish in the 3rd round. Against Max Holloway, it felt like he started faster when he didn't need to, and Max Holloway builds as the fight goes on. So I was expecting the first couple of rounds to be quite cautious, and then the 3rd, 4th, and 5th to be pretty wild. I'm expecting that Brian Ortega this time around. I think he's going to be respectful of Zombie, of his punching power. I also think the enigma of Zombie's ground game is something to be wary of as well, and I think Ortega knows that. So I think we're going to get a striking extravaganza to start with, and if it hits the ground, it'll be because one's getting the better of the other. But as you said, with the twister, there's a difference between the twister and the go-go platter, for example, and a bunch of other submissions. Because if you're setting up a twister, your opponent knows what you're doing, like all the way through. There's like 4 or 5 different control points that you have to finish a twister. So for someone like Brian Ortega, he's going to look at that and think he's going to be able to read the ground game of Korean Zombie as it's coming. But because we just don't really know a great deal about it, and what we've seen in Zombie's last couple of fights is, he knocks people down, then he takes their back and beats them up for a while. That's what I prefer to see in an MMA fighter, because submissions open up with strikes much, much quicker. And Brian Ortega liking to fight off his back might not be a good thing against Zombie, because Zombie's not going to be hanging out in his guard ready to get triangled. He's going to be raining down punches and elbows.
Then unrelated to the fight, you had mentioned like that spinning back kick that Buckley hit. It's hard to train or practice because it could do so much damage. So when would someone practice that in camp?
Well, I actually used to drill that technique quite a lot, and I used to use it in Taekwondo. Oftentimes because I was fighting guys that were taller and faster than me. So I would use the hop side kick to stop them in their tracks and then fire the back kick off it. The difference with the one that Buckley threw is that it required the leg being caught. I mean, most of the time when you drill that technique, you decide you're throwing the back kick before you throw the hop side kick to set it up. So as the kick had been caught the first couple of rounds, the first round a couple of times, there just wasn't the purchase on the ankle for Buckley to do anything. The second time the kick was caught, you could kind of see him lose his balance and start to run backwards, in which case Kasanganay tried to run him down. And the adjustment that he made in that moment to hop and spin his foot to face the opposite way before he fired the back kick, it requires you to be very present and in the moment. And I mean, it's very difficult to find that place. I very rarely found that place when I was fighting. It was very frustrating. That's why I talk about being full reptile. You're in that moment. You're present, and you've not got all these different narratives in your head that you could throw out there. I mean, maybe that was just top of the pile because his leg had been caught a couple of times. But it is such a difficult technique to practice, especially to the face. I mean, I used to predominantly aim for the body pad with the back kick to hit the solar plexus, and the head is such a smaller target, and the risk of throwing it and missing puts you in a real precarious position.
Now, if you're Buckley's coach, are you now trying to rein him back to say, just don't try to do this for the sake of doing it? Like I think you saw with like Dong Young Kim kept trying to do spinning back stuff against Tyron after he knocked out Hathaway. If you're his coach, just be like, don't just go out there and start doing this all the time for no reason.
That is a challenge. Fighters always want to be a better version of themselves coming back in there. And, he's set the bar so high for himself when it comes to knockouts that, he might be chasing that spectacular finish. He might be in the Taekwondo books right now trying to dig out his next, 360 turning kick to the head or whatever. The thing is with Buckley, 10 fights, he's got 7 knockouts on his record going into this fight. His hands are really what does the job. He's a power puncher. And I think that, a good coach will look at his game and just try and refine the basics, because he was quite reckless in that early going. He landed a beautiful uppercut that damaged Kasanganay's eye very, very quickly. But the recklessness to his style is what's going to cost him when he gets higher up in the sport, and that's what we saw against Kevin Holland. For all the spectacular knockouts you can get, you need that foundational base to land on if it doesn't work out, and I think that's what the coaches will work on. That little bit of extra sprinkling of creativity is a wonderful thing, and you don't really need to teach a fighter that. Give them the tools to play with it, but at the same time, just kind of let them be themselves. And he's a talent, absolutely. All good?
Cool.
Excellent.
Awesome.
Thank you very much, everybody.
Appreciate it.